Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are doing a special, unplanned, but very important, I would say, live stream. As people probably know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died, and I know a lot of people have a lot of thoughts and questions about that. So we are so lucky because we're being joined by Samuel Moyn, who is the Henry R. Luce Professor of Jurisprudence and Professor of History at Yale. Really excited. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me, Katie.
Yeah, just wanted to ask you, I guess, to just kind of jump in. First of all, are you a jurist? Can I call you a jurist?
You know, that's a pretty highfalutin word. I went to law school.
But I always try to use it. Is it only
all right,
for judges?
Well, Phil, this is your chance.
All right, it's my chance. I think I've called you that and Rokana that.
All right.
With varying levels of success. But yeah, can you tell us what this means? Where were you when you discovered this? Were you surprised? What your kind of immediate response was to this news about our RBG, as she's called?
Well, you know, I just watched Donald Trump on Twitter say that she lived an extraordinary life, and that's true. And she was on the right side of many things. And, you know, for any feminist, she lived a dream, which was to, you know, engage in a cause and see it come to fruition, and even, you know, move from advocacy to kind of some really important judicial decisions that she authored. On the other hand, her legacy is colored now. She made a bet on her longevity, and we all pay the price that she lost it. It's obviously a tragedy for her and her family, but it was an avoidable tragedy for the nation that yet another presidential election becomes about the fate of this all-powerful Council of Elders that we should, you know, think hard about whether we want to keep.
Keep as a council, or?
Yeah, I mean, where I'd take this discussion is, you know, we have to think about her and her legacy, but we also now have, you know, yet another referendum that's supposed to be about our political leaders, but is in fact about who gets to appoint the judges on this particular court. And maybe at some point we should think about why we're doing that.
Right.
Why are we empowering an institution so much that almost we've converted democracy into who gets to be on it?
So I want to ask you about those two kind of two levels that you brought up. One is her life, right? And the significance of her as an individual, what this means, the way she kind of bet on her own longevity, and then want to get into the larger question of how we should be talking about this. But just for the kind of immediate discussion, what were her options? I mean, I think that most people thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, right? I think because that the logic was that she was going to wait it out.
Absolutely.
Ginsburg was going to wait it out and then be replaced by President Hillary Clinton.
Correct.
What would have happened had she retired under President Obama, and what could he have been able to achieve had it happened under his presidency? Because of course we saw a lot of gridlock with his attempts.
No, that's true. You know, and you're absolutely right that, you know, to second guess her, especially now that she's gone, you know, the night she died is pretty unseemly. On the other hand, she was a public figure and made choices that have affected us all now.
I think she'd want us to.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Right?
Well, with that assurance, let's plow ahead. You know, it would have been an incredible thing to see Hillary Clinton replace Ruth Ginsburg. And of course, most of us thought that's what would happen. On the other hand, she was, you know, grievously ill at several points. And and she was also elderly. So she could have retired in 2013. You know, that was the moment where she really missed a chance. At that point, it really wasn't predictable that, you know, Hillary would, you know, necessarily succeed Barack Obama, and she was 80 years old. So I regard that as a pretty, disastrous mistake in retrospect. The thing is, though, anyone in power, wants to preserve it. And, we all think we're going to live forever, you and me too. So I don't blame her so much as the fact that we've created this situation for ourselves and don't seem to want to do anything to fix it. The dominant, Twitter discourse right now is that we have to depoliticize the Supreme Court, put it back the way it was in some yesteryear when it was neutral. But the fact is, it's always been political. It's always been a policy-making body. And, we've fought over who's on it for generations now. So until we realize that we need to fix it, you can't really blame those who want to be on it, who get on it, for wielding the power that we give them.
Right. And what kind of, can you just as a jurist, can you talk about her legacy, her intellectual, or what's the word? Jurisprudential, is that it? Legacy? Yeah,
that's the word. Look, I'm not a huge expert, but I'll say a few things. She emerged as, first of all, she went to law school at a time almost no women did. And she was tenacious and in getting through it. We've seen the movies now. There are multiple, documentaries and movies about it. And, she's an icon, not least to my own daughters. And, it's incredible that she, opened these possibilities and really became a model for so many people. She, as an advocate, she really devised the strategy as that led the Supreme Court before she was on it, decades before she was on it, to say that gender discrimination should be treated seriously under the Constitution, in particular under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Before then, racial discrimination had been given what's called heightened scrutiny, and she helped convince them that gender discrimination also was serious enough that the Constitution, cares. And that was a major achievement. And it was really a kind of strategic, on her part to figure out how to convince all male justices at that time to make the Constitution into something that could protect women. As a justice, she got this incredible opportunity to even give more teeth to, protections against gender discrimination under the Constitution, most famously in a case that shut down or seriously altered the Virginia Military Institute, which had been an all-male school. And she wrote a decision. It's a classic decision that said that it's unconstitutional for there to be a state-run all-male school. In later life, she became a dissenter. Some of her liberal colleagues, like Stephen Breyer and Elena Kagan, began exploring a strategy of compromising with the right to kind of like make the outcomes less bad. And Ruth Ginsburg, in a case like that involves voting rights, wrote a pretty impressive dissent in another case in which the Obamacare was nearly struck down, and part of it was struck down. She wrote an incredibly impassioned dissent. So at the end of her life, she became much more, let's say, aggressively liberal in her rhetoric. She had been a centrist liberal and really, a radical for women, but not, with respect to, kind of larger social issues for most of her life. Towards the end, she never became a radical, in the way you and I might think of it, but she definitely would get rowdy as the court moved right from time to time.
And in terms of what could have happened, I honestly, did Obama have options? Could he have played harder? Were his hands really tied when he was trying to get Merrick Garland through?
People have wondered if he could have done anything. In the end, it's down to Mitch McConnell, who at that point controlled the Senate and seems impervious to, anything other than, pursuing his own power, maybe the power of his party. I'm doubtful, but, as we know from the beginning, from 2009, Obama always feared himself getting rowdy, going to the people.
Right.
He was not confrontational, and he paid a huge price at several turns. Maybe it could have made a difference had he, been in a way as nasty a politician as Mitch McConnell has repeatedly shown himself to be.
Right, and of course, according to someone like Thomas Frank, maybe he would probably argue that he didn't pay the price, and it was part of, Obama wanted that, right? Which is not like some sinister conspiracy theory, just that often
Right.
think of the Dems as being bad at playing hardball, but actually they don't want to be playing it.
I think that's right. And, you go back to his selection of Garland, who's actually pretty far right. I mean,
right.
Which is, it makes it kind of, an amazing choice. But if he thought it was going to be symbolic, he could have chosen someone further left, unless he thought choosing someone who's really quite moderate could get through. But then it turned out even that kind of compromise, didn't spare him a fight. And that's like the story of Obama's life. He compromises and still gets, intransigence from the Republicans,
Right.
And never learned. But it may just mean that he was pretty much a centrist all along himself and didn't want to go left or challenge the Republicans.
Right. Like, what was there to learn?
Right. That sounds like a pretty plausible way of interpreting it to me.
And so what's going to happen next? What are your predictions? And then we can get into kind of the larger question of what is to be done, both in terms of this particular nomination, but also, okay, so there's a problem with the way this country is run and with the Supreme Court. So now what?
Well, so in the short term,
put a lot on your, not to
no,
not to put too much pressure on you.
I really do want to get to those larger issues, because that's what I'm actually, thinking about. I mean, in the short term, there are two separate questions. What does Donald Trump do, and what does Mitch McConnell do? And the second question also depends on, really, I suppose, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and Mitt Romney. So to start with Donald Trump, I think that this is, in a way, salvation for him. Anyone who's still paying attention to the pandemic is in a new space. Those who are politically active certainly will be on the edge of their seats for this one, on left and right. And, Donald Trump will probably nominate someone, but may, profit from not seeing that person, confirmed immediately, and making it, an issue on which he can say the election should turn. And that will have, incalculable impact on, people on the right. Now, Biden is so far to the right himself that it's not, clear that it will really motivate that many people, but there may be some who really care so much about having this sixth reactionary vote on the court now that they're mobilized. It's possible that Trump will, I think stupidly try to collude with McConnell to get the vote to happen before the election. And that will be very difficult to achieve. It depends on whether McConnell wants to do that. And I've been having disputes with friends online about this in the last couple of hours. If McConnell cares principally about his own power, then he cares less about the Supreme Court than losing the Senate. He doesn't care as much about losing the presidency, but losing the Senate means the loss of his own power, could mean the loss of his own seat, although that's unlikely. But if he cares, about long-term power, he's going to wait. If, on the other hand, he cares about the Supreme Court, which it seems like he does, and he recognizes that the Republicans are about to start losing a lot of elections, and this is a golden moment to lock in generational control over the Supreme Court in a way that will be very hard for the Democrats to erode, then this is an extraordinary stroke of luck for McConnell. And more than that, he's talked about it in those terms, that if there's a vacancy, even in October, he would act. Now, we've seen statements. I mean, strangely, there was a statement from Trump before Trump actually knew that she had died, to the effect that he will nominate someone. And McConnell also put out a public statement that he will see that nominee through to a vote, not exactly clearly by November 3rd, but certainly by January 20th. So it's a fascinating, moment to see what those two will do. And I suppose McConnell's calculus, as I said, will depend, on these three, senators who he can't perfectly control. Susan Collins has been pretty compliant. She voted for Brett Kavanaugh. She didn't vote against impeachment. She didn't vote for impeachment.
Right.
On the other hand, she was burned badly. She's got a fight in Maine, et cetera. The other two, Murkowski and Romney, have both said that they don't think that a justice should be replaced, either in general in the last year of a presidential term, or in this case. So, did they stick to their principles, or did they, take a deal? Did they decide that actually this is an extraordinary opportunity for the right? I guess time will tell.
Yeah, there are probably some resistance types, right, who think that who are hoping that they'll take this as an opportunity, not for the right, but for kind of the, the sake of the republic or something.
Sure. No, it'll be represented that way. If, Romney has become, obviously a hero, even amongst liberals.
Yeah.
For, staring reality in the face.
Yeah.
Not hard. And, Murkowski is, an interesting figure because she doesn't seem as compliant as Collins. On the other hand, all of these people have, voted for, economic neoliberalism and endless war for decades. So,
Right.
We're talking about people who it's like, shades of black. But that matters. That could matter in this situation.
Right.
But
those are the three who could stand between him and
those are the three who, if McConnell decides to push that nominee through, could block it. Got
it. Okay. And who do you think the scariest potential picks by Trump are?
The truth is that at least when, he was working with, Don McGahn, he really just deferred to, the Federalist Society, and he's generally done so on judicial appointments, which has meant that, both of his picks, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, have been, groomed in the typical way. They went to one of two schools. They clerked for the Supreme Court themselves, well-trained and so forth. I believe that it would make sense, especially if the vote is going to be close no matter what, for him to pick someone of that kind. For some of the picks in the lower judiciary, he's nominated people almost, without qualification to be a judge. He won't do that for sure. He wants, this pick to be respected. So I don't think we're talking about crazies, but I do think we're talking about a sixth vote for a lot of nefarious outcomes, no matter what.
Yeah. Can you see the questions, by the way? Because I have to close a door. Someone opened a door that I closed. Do you see them on the YouTube? And if not, I can just ask you.
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay,
now,
great.
sorry, I was looking at private chat instead of comments.
Oh, no, it's not. Don't worry. And there's nothing that listed to everyone about private chat. It's literally how you can message.
All right, cool.
So I'm going to go close the door. And
all right,
you let me
good.
know which one. Okay. Okay, I'm back. Did any questions strike your fancy?
They're mostly comments, and they're,
I know.
Let's see. Pretty good ones.
The like one. Let's see. One question was, there were some interesting. Let's see. Brian Fredericks. Let's see. A big.
Amy Coney Barrett
yes.
will be Trump's choice. That's not implausible. I mean, I think she came very close in the prior round, and that often happens. When Ginsburg was nominated, everyone thought it would go to Stephen Breyer, who then got it the next time.
Right.
He had a bad interview with Clinton, and yet he's on the court now. He's himself up there in years.
And then let's see. Sparky says Ginsburg and Alito showed that people can be close friends even with significant political differences. It used to be pretty common. Since Ted Cruz's fellow senators dislike him, if he's nominated for SCOTUS, he may be confirmed just so they can get rid of him. Ooh, we got to make sure. We got to somehow make Ted Cruz beloved, so we can prevent that from happening.
It's true that Ginsburg and Scalia were really close, and they went to the opera together and so forth. Yeah. My take is that's all part of this almost Kremlinological attitude where we're curious about those who wield power over us. And it's nice that they got along, but is that what we want our political discussion to be about?
Right.
Especially we didn't vote for these people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember when Scalia died, I wrote something for Salon and they gave it a really annoying title, but it was basically about how I wasn't sad that he was dead. I wasn't sad he was off the court. And I think he was an odious human being who I believe he actually ruled that or said or wrote that the Constitution doesn't bar or doesn't prevent or prohibit someone from being executed if they were legally represented, even if they're innocent.
That may be. I mean, it's very possible. He was an originalist, which means that the Eighth Amendment, barring cruel and unusual punishment, he thought that couldn't include things, that changed morally since the 18th century. Right. And maybe that was one of them.
Yeah. Funny guy, though. Seemed very funny.
Oh, brilliant and funny. And, I teach the court's opinions to law students, and he's, easily the most readable and enjoyable writer the court has seen in generations.
Who's the dumbest?
Right now?
Right now in history, whichever.
I find that a hard one because it was often thought that Clarence Thomas was an idiot. He never spoke at oral argument, and it was said that his clerks wrote his opinions. I actually think he's brilliant. I mean, I think he has a nefarious political project, but he's, envision some outcomes that the court as a whole has later reached. And a lot of the dismissal of him was a kind of liberal racism.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, these are all smart people.
Yeah, that's a scary thing, right?
They are, we watch the court and we watch people doing politics in the name of law, and they're very good at what they do. They've sustained this illusion that when they make policy choices, it's the law making them for 200 years now. And, I just think we should emphasize that that's a lie. And, we should make our own political decisions, not shunt it off and pretend that they've already been made in some, dusty old piece of parchment.
Right. Alito and Kavanaugh, are they really as smart as the other ones?
Yeah, they're smart guys. I mean, I don't want to. I have trouble ranking them because they are good at what they do.
Yeah.
Well trained and well groomed, and I don't think Alito did, but Kavanaugh certainly prepared to do this from a young age. And if you put your mind to it, you can get good at some things.
Right.
Apparently being a Supreme Court justice is one of them.
Right. Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about, well, first of all, who do you think Biden would nominate?
I think Biden would nominate a liberal of some kind. We know that his priors, his proclivities are, centrist. And it's really hard to say. I mean, I would hope he would, as someone who didn't go to Harvard or Yale, kind of revive this old tradition that you may need to be a lawyer, but you don't need to be a judge, and you don't need to be, minted by one of these elite schools to play this role. Even in recent days, he's emphasized that he's still, in a sense, an outsider. And some of the recent profiles for, all that you and I might, dunk on him, he does still have a sense that, he's never been respected by Washington elites, because of his background and his education. And, I think the Supreme Court was a better thing, always bad, but a better thing when, there was a range of Americans on it and not just those who have gone to my school.
Your school, as in someone at Yale?
It's currently, it's now that actually Ginsburg death means that there's no one on the court that didn't go to Harvard or didn't graduate from Harvard or Yale. She started at Harvard and graduated from Columbia. All the rest, I think it's now 4-4 Harvard, Yale. Let's see.
She graduated from, as in she started at Harvard undergrad and did Columbia Law.
No, she started at Harvard Law, but because she was married with children and her husband graduated before her and moved to New York, she transferred to Columbia and graduated from there.
She stepped down. She took it a notch down.
She took a huge step down.
Yeah, but a much better city. Let's be honest.
I think that's right.
Cambridge versus New York.
Yeah,
can't really blame her.
It's no contest.
Yeah. So let's see. Also, Biden, as someone who, what did he help do? He was anti-busing because he thought busing was, as he said, this is one of my favorite Biden arguments, that it was a rejection of Black is beautiful. He tried to pretend that the reason he opposed busing was because it was assimilationist.
Right. He said that not at the time, but more recently.
No, he said it at the time.
At the time. Okay. Yeah. No, that's quite
he said Black is beautiful. Like he said, it's a rejection of, he didn't use probably the word assimilationist then, but he definitely used that, the Black pride, Black is beautiful thing, which is
The best you can
Amazing.
say about Biden is that he seems to conform to what everyone else is saying,
Right.
like the center of the party. And, the center of the party, for all of its, defects, has moved a fair bit. And so he's moving too. The $1 million question, if he wins, no matter what happens with the Supreme Court, is how is Biden going to govern? And above all, who is he going to appoint himself to various positions? Stephen Breyer is not going to be on the court that much longer, and the next president presumably will get to replace him. And, that's going to be on Biden. But we've got a big, bump in the road now before any of that can happen.
And then what about expanding the court and packing the court? And before then, I just want to share some trivia. Do you know why Rehnquist added golden stripes to his robe?
It had to do with the musical.
Yeah, Iolanthe.
Right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. And I think he was very proud of sporting those gold bars during Bill Clinton's impeachment.
Right. Yeah. Interesting guy.
Yes.
Big fan of hush puppies.
Ah, okay. Well, that's one thing I share with. Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought we were talking about the food.
Oh, no. He wore the hush puppy shoes. Yeah.
All right. Very good.
And okay. And so let's talk about expanding the court, packing the court. That's very controversial. People on both sides of the political spectrum have, there's overlap, there's disagreement. It's not quite, doesn't fall neatly along the political spectrum. So what's your hot take?
So, basically, court packing was tried by Franklin Roosevelt in 1937. It failed, but most people think it shifted the court kind of indirectly. And it's even though a lot of other, reforms to the Supreme Court have been proposed in U.S. history, court packing is like on people's minds anytime the topic comes up. So when McConnell acted to deprive the Democrats of their seat, people began to talk about court packing again after 60 years, 70 years. The idea was that the court had to be unstolen, and that would be done by appointing extra justices once the Democrats were in power. Today, there's a huge spike in court packing talk because if McConnell gets, a second, illicit justice appointed, the Democrats, it's thought, have to strike back and, add two of their own or more. Now, it's very divisive for a few reasons. One is that the number of justices, 9, has been stable since the 19th century. And, some people even think it would be unconstitutional to add justices. There's also a risk, if you think power will change hands, that it will start this escalatory cycle and, soon we'll have hundreds of justices. That's actually happened in Poland. And so some people think it's, sort of, would lead to Armageddon. Now, we're already in Armageddon in a sense, so it's not clear that matters that much. My take is that, court packing changes who's on the court, but not the power of the court. And so I think we should consider other approaches to the court that aren't just about getting our friends on it and letting them rule us instead of the right. Because I think we should rule ourselves in a democracy. So, some proposals that work that way would include what's called jurisdiction stripping. So the idea of jurisdiction stripping is that when you pass HR 1 or the Green New Deal, you say this is not reviewable in the Supreme Court or the federal judiciary. You disallow the courts from the ability to hear cases on certain topics. There's also a proposal to make the justices work by a supermajority rule rather than a majority rule, like 6-3 or 7-2. And the idea there is that when something's flagrantly unconstitutional and 8 or 9 justices can agree that it is, Democrats and Republicans, they can overturn the law. But when not that many agree, then the law stands. And so it's a way, an effect of transferring power back to the political branches and especially the Congress. There are other such fixes, but those are the ones I favor. That they're about kind of shifting power away from the court rather than changing who the personnel are on the court.
And so how would that be achieved? How quickly could that happen? What are all the
well, all of these would require statutes. So to court pack, you'd have to pass a law that expanded the Supreme Court, and then you'd have to nominate and confirm each new justice.
Can you say that again? Sorry, you cut out for a second. For court packing, you'd have
to first pass a law, both houses of Congress, presidential signature, saying that the Supreme Court is now X justices, 11, 13, 100. And then for each vacancy, you'd have to have the president nominate a new judge and confirm that person in the Senate. Very laborious. The other, remedies I discussed also require statutes, laws passed. In the case of jurisdiction stripping, you don't need to pass a new law. You just, whenever you pass a law about something you want, like HR 1 for democracy or the Green New Deal or whatever, you just add to that law provisions that, forbid the Supreme Court or the federal judiciary from hearing constitutional challenges. Now, the court can always say, you can't take our power away, but they can also say you can't add justices to the Supreme Court. So all of these proposals to challenge the court can face the obstruction of the court itself. And so we'd have to get into a lot of detail, like which of these might work better, which would be less easy for the court itself to disallow, which might be less risky if the Republicans get back into power. I mentioned that court packing, the risk is that they'll just pack again when they're in power and put their people on. And suddenly we're in a situation where every election, the Supreme Court expands. Some of those other reforms I mentioned seem not to have that same risk, because if the court is less powerful, then we fight less about it. And we don't have national soul searching and debate about every justice, which is my dream. What if we actually talked about policy rather than which lawyers are going to serve on this council of elders to take the place of democracy?
Right. Yeah. And you say that as a lawyer, right?
I went to law school.
Yeah. As a jurist.
As a jurist, I say that juristocracy is bad. Right. Democracy is good.
Yeah. It's interesting. Did you, that so many people who studied the law are so, you guys seem to have a kind of tortured relationship with it.
Well, no, I mean, most lawyers love the Supreme Court, and they love, rule of the country via the legal profession. But right. No wonder. I mean, that's saying they love ruling them, exercising the power to rule themselves.
Yeah, I guess leftists, I should say.
Oh, leftists. Yeah. No, I think leftists have always had a serious quandary about the legal profession, which has generally been, pretty conservative unless you piss it off.
Right. Sorry, I'm just tweeting. 1 second. I want to make sure. There's another door issue. 1 second.
No problem.
Sorry about that. Hello? Oh. Okay. Sorry about that. I have speaking of packed, a packed court, I have a packed house. With some, relatives. Okay.
No worries.
So including little, not totally adult people who are trying to open the door, which is endearing. Although sometimes it happens with useful idiots and my parents, so it doesn't have to be a little kid. Let's see. Okay, so sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions. And I heard you on Doug Henwood's show. talking about Trump as a fascist or the discourse around that. And that's something that I think is very fraught for a lot of people.
Right.
How do you frame Trump in terms of being both, because you are a professor of both history and of jurisprudence. So from a historical perspective and also from a jurisprudential perspective, how do you see him as an aberration and a continuation? Where does he fall in those two categories?
It's a great question. I think it's caused a lot of controversy and dispute on the left, and so what I have to say will not please everyone. I think that there are some clear ways in which Trump is like an offensive novelty, but he's in office because of policy dating back decades as a result of a protest vote against things like endless war and economic neoliberalism. And so we're on the hook for Trump's ascendancy in this country. Old policies, the risk is that Biden actually it epitomizes those old choices rather than representing a break from them. And so the risk is that those old choices will just get restored and repeated. And, I've coined this so far unpopular, term Trump washing to refer to, the attitude of a lot of people, especially those who made all of those failed policies, to basically say, Trump's an aberration, get rid of him and things will be hunky dory. But, if you believe that Trump's a symptom, then, the choice seems to be between, whether we restore the disease or, keep these really flagrant symptoms. As to fascism, it seems undoubted. Authoritarianism, of which fascism is, I guess, one kind. He has instincts in that direction. I think that the true story of his presidency is that he's been weak. He's been strong when one of two things has occurred. Either he's pursued the standard Republican program of, tax cuts for the rich and socially conservative judges for the, religious and other morally conservative, or he's operated in zones where we've accreted so much power to the presidency over generations, like foreign affairs and immigration. So if we hate those things, we should check ourselves, because we didn't just choose policies that led to Trump, but we made the office of the presidency that he's inhabited. And yet many of the things he's tried to do have been checked. He sent, for a photo op with a Bible, some troops into the square in Washington. And amazingly, you then saw the greatest acts of insubordination since the Korean War, when the Secretary of Defense said he'd never, deploy troops for crowd control. And, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs outright apologized for having been part of it. We can argue about other cases. Portland is an atrocity, but it lasted briefly and he was stopped and he shifted policy. In so many instances, he has lost in the courts serially, not always as, to the extent we'd like. So, this is not Benito Mussolini or Adolf Hitler. Maybe there's fascism in all of us. We hurt others, who are different. And that's a long American tradition that doesn't require us to look abroad or to Europe or, to invoke 1933 or Adolf Hitler. So, my basic worry is that the labels distract us. And in particular, they're about like getting us off the hook when we ought to, check ourselves and figure out how, in a way, we made this situation possible. Trump is us. And, I just don't think it's accurate or helpful to say we're in a fascist, country right now. Least of all, if we're trying to convince those gettable voters in November. I mean, I don't want to be called a fascist if I'm on the fence.
Right.
Rather, I want my interests acknowledged, and that has to do with the shortcomings of elite rule, neoliberalism, endless war, the kinds of things that have made the states in which Trump won, for all of their, endemic American racism, righteously angry about, the policies that have lasted most of our lives.
Yeah. And what are you working on now in your own research and work?
I just finished a book that's about what I'm calling humane war. It's about how we had this torture debate after 9/11, but unlike after My Lai, we didn't end that war. We actually just made it humane and continued it endlessly and forever. And so it's about the rise of drones and special forces, about the continuities you see between the later years after the torture debate of George W. Bush's war on terror, and then Barack Obama's and indeed Donald Trump's war on terror. And it's kind of a frightening phenomenon because in a way we messed up after 9/11 because we helped the American state create a form of war that's less visible, hard to challenge, and seems not to ever end, even when politicians can, get a lot of electoral traction by saying they're against them.
Right.
So that's out in a year.
Oh, great. Hopefully the world is still around then.
If there are printing presses and Barack Obama hasn't used all the ink.
Yeah, I mean
that's his memoir.
That's you guys should maybe you guys could go on a book tour together.
Oh, absolutely.
I
can ride in the at the end of the caravan, and
And what is I want to know your thoughts on Julian Assange.
Well, I think that these cases of Assange and Snowden are testaments to an overweening surveillance and security state, and that one of the amazing things that happened lately, of course, was that Donald Trump didn't reject pardoning Snowden outright, but said he would think about it. I think that if we're interested in the continuities we're talking about before, I think we have to look deeper at the way in which the uses of state power have been pretty bad long before Donald Trump, the fascist, ever arose. And someone like Assange, is testament to that. You may not agree with everything he's done, but the question that we should care about is, should he be tried under these statutes? And I think the answer is pretty clear. I think that WikiLeaks revealed true facts about electoral hijinks. Not that the Russians were committing, though they've committed their fair share, but that the Democratic, national Democratic Party was engaged in, and that wasn't post-truth. It was part of the truth that it was useful for us to know. Now, there's room for laws that protect privacy and protect property. And he may have broken some, but there's also room for transparency and the public right to know. But above all, I think the question is, should we get punitive with these guys once we've seen the service they've done for the public? And I just think the answer is clearly no.
Yeah. It seems like, it's so mind-boggling, although it shouldn't be, I guess, that how little attention the media is paying to this story.
Right.
And all the people who talk about Trump being an existential threat and being
Right.
an enemy to free press, freedom of speech, it drives me crazy that these same people are okay siding with Pompeo and Trump on this issue when Obama, who these same Mick resistance people love and praise as a nuanced, rational thinker, respecter of the rule of law and the Constitution, why aren't they siding with him, right? Not that he was perfect on this at all, but first of all, they claim he was. And secondly, he did not pursue Assange on this issue.
Right. Well, it seems as if the red thread is that they oppose people who challenge their own power.
Yeah.
And that's the only way you can reconcile. The principles are often noble that are invoked, and there's something to celebrate about that. But then you demand that the people live by them less selectively.
Right. Yeah. Also, so many of the principles I feel like are often like the freakouts are often, I think, about decorum and
I think that's fair.
Like, we're taking off the mask, like hearing.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. On the other hand, I think we should welcome it, even when the invocations of principles are opportunistic. When it kind of dawns on people once Donald Trump has powers we gave prior presidents, that the powers themselves are bad. You see that to some degree in the war context, where a lot of right-thinking people say we need fundamental reform to the way we allocate war powers in this country. And the fact that they supported that allocation when it was George W. Bush or Barack Obama wielding it, and then kind of the scales fall from their eyes when Trump does. It's revealing, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't cultivate allies when we can agree that the power itself needs to be challenged.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the ultimate goal is not to own the libs as having.
As satisfying as that is, the outcomes matter more.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's true. I think we all have different roles to play, but people should be invited to apply these principles, universally or consistently. Someone actually who's watching the show texted me, a friend of mine, wants to know about major upcoming decisions or issues that could be affected. And also, if you could get into Trump's general effect on the federal judiciary, which most people don't know about, probably his most significant actions.
Great. Those are both great, questions. So, to my knowledge, so there are some big effects of Ruth Ginsburg's, tragic passing. One is that there are 8 justices, which means that if it's 4-4, there's no decision. And that's of particular significance in, all the cases that come up starting in October, when there will certainly be no new justice. The most obvious one is the latest challenge to the American, the Obamacare statute, which was passed so long ago and has been challenged repeatedly, and is now being challenged because it said that making the penalty or tax that Americans have to pay if they don't get Obamacare makes the whole statute unconstitutional. And that's been a closely watched case. It seems like it may come out 4-4 now. I think that means that the lower court ruling out of Texas will stand, which is a bad thing. On the second question, which is a great one, it's absolutely true that Trump, largely as a result of Don McGahn, who's again, broken with Trump, helped in the Mueller investigation, and no longer works at the White House, really did an extraordinary job in getting conservative judges, not Supreme Court justices, through in cooperation with Mitch McConnell. And so I think, it's fair to say that Trump is the most successful president in the last few decades at stocking the bench. we have a Trumpified judiciary, no matter what happens to Ginsburg's seat on the Supreme Court. And, a lot of Democrats rightly argue that since the Supreme Court hears so few cases relative to the judiciary as a whole, we really ought to prioritize reform of the whole judiciary. It could be possible, for example, to just add lots of judges below the Supreme Court. That was done last time under Jimmy Carter. And, I support that. It's, let's say, pretty ordinary in American history to expand the overall size of the judiciary. In this case, Trump has not abused norms. He's just been very focused and very good at filling openings in the judiciary. So, for my druthers, I'd rather keep our, minds on the Supreme Court for two reasons. First, there is a good case that the Supreme Court is so far right because of all of these hijinks and irregularities. And second, its power is just much greater than the rest of the judiciary because has the final word. It has, because of this idea in American history of judicial supremacy, not just the final word relative to the other courts, but relative to the other branches of government. And that's why I've been making this case for disempowering the institution. And so, the questioner is absolutely right, though, that we definitely need to care about the short term, what happens in October, and about the lower courts alongside our fears about what will happen to the highest court.
And have your politics changed over time? I'm just curious. Has your view of the law? Oops, sorry. I opened another window. Have your views on the law, on history, on politics, have they changed over time?
Not as much as my critics think. I have changed my views. In the area in which I used to work in international affairs. I was in the 90s when I worked in the Clinton White House as an intern on the Kosovo Wars, a defender of humanitarian intervention. I believed in it, and I've since been, pretty critical of it. But, my basic, priors have been left for a long time. What's different for those of us who are older, like me, is that the 90s, the era of the end of history, were a hard time to be a young person, as I was then, because, if you drank the Kool-Aid that we were offered by our teachers and elders, there really wasn't, much prospect of a left renaissance. And that's happened just in the past few years, which has been an extraordinary thing. So I think younger people are, in a sense, lucky. Now, they've been driven by the excesses and outrages of their lived experience after 2008, which I have had been cushioned from. But I'm really eager to see what those young people are going to make of the world. I think they're beyond many of the mythologies that I was offered as when I was their age, and they're also lucky for that reason.
And just want to say, Katie, you should have Sam on your show often. I agree. Thank you, Sparky, for that comment.
Thanks, Sparky. Anytime, obviously. And
what are you? What made you change on the intervention issue for humanitarian intervention?
Well, so I principally the Iraq War. When I saw that all the rationales that we had come up with were cynically used by neoconservatives opportunistically, but I also began to think much more critically about the extraordinary hierarchical power my country enjoys relative to all the others, and the kind of noblesse oblige attitude that young Americans were offered when I was more impressionable I came to think of as itself intolerable. And, when you see events like we saw this summer, you begin to think that if anyone needs a humanitarian intervention, it's us.
Yeah. And can you talk more about, I'm just intrigued by the book you're working on about humane war, you called it?
That's one of the working titles. I mean, the book's done, but the title's not up to me. And I think if the title's supposed to be Humane, How Americans Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War.
Okay. So, and that's, a lot of people will say, well, drone warfare is not ideal. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than troops on the ground.
Correct. So that was Obama's, constant mantra.
Right.
Yeah. And there's an interesting moment when, the leader of Code Pink, the activist group, Medea Benjamin, was present and heckled him at Fort McNair. And, ironically, she called for more humane war and attacked the drones for not being humane enough. And Obama responded, well, what do you want me to do? Make it less humane? So my worry is that, in a way, the critics and the defenders of American war are locked in a kind of agreement about what the goal ought to be. Even though Medea Benjamin is part of a peace group, she should and generally does argue for less war, no war, or end to war. We've maybe not controlled the risk that when we ask for more humane war too, we have to make sure that the result is not Obama saying, but that's what I'm providing. And if you want me to make it more humane, I'll try, because that's essentially what happened under the Obama administration. But, I'm not saying that we should have brutal war, but I'm saying, you shouldn't focus so much on torture and so forth to the exclusion of the fact of the war. And so always join your concern about atrocity with your concern about aggression and, warmongering, which is kind of at the root of it all. And
what about hybrid warfare? Ideological warfare, lawfare?
Lawfare. Well, lawfare is a website, and before then it was a slogan developed to describe using the law as a weapon of war. And the claim was that Americans follow the law and terrorists kind of invoke the law to strategize about how to hem in America because they have no other weapons powerful enough. My own take is that the law, all of law is lawfare. Everyone's trying to game the system all the time. Law, what you learn in law school or should is that the law is just what you can succeed in getting people to believe it is. And that's my trouble with the Supreme Court is that there's too much, credulity when people think that these sages or gurus kind of aren't just, doing their own politics.
Right.
And so, lawfare, I think, is probably a term that ought to be avoided because it gives the false impression that some people aren't doing it when, in fact, everyone is in every domain and not just in, the laws of war.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think that the way. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Dad and dog. I got a drink. I think that the way that my Ben Norton was using it, I think the way he was using it was more in a hybrid warfare. Kind of war by economic warfare, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there, in a way, we're living in the last stages of more primitive forms of war that involve, humans and violence. Humans are getting edited out. There aren't just drones, but, the prospect of autonomous weaponry that isn't piloted even from afar. And then, of course, there's cyber war and, economic war is a very old phenomenon, but cyber war is new. Right. And these are the way that, geopolitics is going to be, conducted in the future. Maybe you can make an argument that they're all like affected by this new demand that war be humane. And if that's true, then my argument about needing to care about like the underlying belligerency and the conditions that lead to, the strife matter much more than how the strife is conducted. How
Right.
we're detaining people, whether we're torturing, as important as those issues are.
Right.
How many civilians the drones are killing.
Right. Because I mean, that's another interesting thing is that there's so much. Oh, 1 second. Let me just, guys, because this was a surprise and everyone's really enjoying this, make sure you right now, everyone pause what you're doing, which is watching this, and share and like. Share, like, subscribe, but share and like, because we want to get to 1,000 viewers. We're at 893. I think we can do it. And, because this is a really important discussion. And people are really enjoying what Sam is saying. So, and I changed his name so you guys can see his name because he very modestly just wrote Sam. So I have his full name and also his Twitter handle because everyone should be following his Twitter handle as well. And what was the thing I was just going to say? What did you just say? Torture? Oh, I know. Okay. So there are two things that I want to say. I'll say them out loud so that in case I forget them. But one is the issue of casualties, and then the other is the issue of meritocracy in the Supreme Court. But it seems like it seems to me like sorry, I'm trying to hide this so that people see your name. Oh, and also patreon.com/the Katie Halper Show. Patreon.com/the Katie Halper Show. But it seems like when I remember, like, I actually saw this play Embedded that Tim Robbins wrote. That's about the embedded media.
I think I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
And then we turned it into a movie. I helped produce
that.
Oh,
cool.
Yeah, in a past life. But I remember Patricia Clarkson, who was who came to the screening. We were interviewing people, and she talked about how much like she realized that the word casualties, how much that downplays what happens to people. And it's true. And I didn't realize that until she said that. And she's like, a casualty can be someone losing a limb, losing two limbs.
Correct.
And it's true. I would always be like relieved when I would hear about, this number of deaths and this number of only casualties. And it kind of reminds me of, obviously death is worse.
Correct.
And although with modern warfare and stuff, it's, not even modern warfare, that song, what is it, Waltzing Matilda, that like really brutal song about coming back from Gallipoli and, not being able to dance. And, but especially now because of medicine advancing so much, you have people coming back and surviving in ways they couldn't have even then. Anyway, but yes, this issue of, people may not be killed, they may be maimed, they may just have PTSD.
Right.
And from here, and then the population's there, all those things, plus destabilization. I mean, that's the other thing. It's just the economic, the devastation that happens even when people aren't killed or maimed.
Absolutely. Yeah. No one should be, celebrating, since, you can't trivialize the residual violence and nonviolent consequences of wars. I mean, you can say, if we agree that death is the worst thing, that it's extraordinary how less fatal war is today. In American wars, something like 4 to 6 million Vietnamese died in that war, and we're just nowhere near those totals. As you say, we should be very attentive to the way in which what's to get substituted for death is other forms of harm. At the end of the story, the question is, what are the nonviolent forms of harm? So if you have drones constantly flying overhead, or they could strike and rarely do, it's a pretty chilling picture.
Right.
And, it seems as if a lot of folks who care about making war more humane would like to see something like a globalized American policing. Now, we know that American policing in America is brutal and violent. But, you can ask at home and abroad, what do we want? For there to be nonviolent policing or to abolish policing? Doesn't it reflect these hierarchies we sustain, that we have some people policed and others not?
Right.
And to me, surveillance and policing, the kind of thing that got Edward Snowden so upset, are also chilling forms of domination. And so we can't, in our zeal to care about like the worst things on the continuum, death, violent injury, PTSD, forget that like what we're substituting also has its dark side.
Right. What we're substituting. Yeah, exactly. Right. And of course, in purely kind of self-interested national security terms, it's just, the droning does not exactly make a population more friendly.
No. So, I mean, these strategies, I mean, all of the strategies on the continuum have been self-defeating and worsen the problem they set out to solve.
Right.
And that's true of the biggest wars, Iraq, down the continuum to, drones and so forth. So like, if we were in charge, we wouldn't be doing any of this because it's counterproductive.
Right.
But the point is that, we have some large group of people who think, terrorism's a problem. And as long as we conduct American hegemony humanely, we're good people. And that's what I'm saying is false.
Right.
So we can't convince enough people that like American hegemony and all of the acts that have been involved in it cause blowback, make things worse, not just for them, but for us. And so I think, I'm just trying to focus on people who then say, no, but we've made it more humane. We formed a cause group to lessen the civilian casualties. But let's not talk about the war itself. And,
right.
That's a moral error.
Right.
And we should call them on it.
Going back to the issue of, I agree. Let's call them out. Some we can call out, some we can call in, but the ones that we're not going to get, we got to call them out. That's an interesting calculation.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Make, right?
It goes back to our earlier discussion about owning people versus recruiting them.
Exactly, right.
And compromising with them. Yeah.
Thank you, Robin Bennett, for this super sticker. And then it also seems that there's a the kind of belief in, I think there's a difference between admitting when people are smart, like you were doing, and then pretending that they're apolitical. So,
of course,
and not what you were not doing, but it just makes me think of how like there's so much faith in the system of meritocracy and technocracy. And you see it applied to the Supreme Court also, right? Like, these guys are really smart, which is true, but they're also ideologues.
Correct.
And they do, there's this, it's a kind of like, and so many people believe it, even smart people with good politics, they really do believe that there's just something kind of okay and noble about that happening. And these guys really know what they're talking about. Yeah. Which they do, but they are also using it, right?
That's right.
Achieve certain things.
Look, the dream that education would entitle people to rule without being self-serving is very old, and it's been constantly proved illusory. That's why I think this election, for all of its shortcomings, it is exciting at the very least, in that we have two of the worst educated people. And, they're not the brightest either, squaring off against each other. It's not like an intra-Ivy League contest like we're used to. And I think that, suggests that people are seeing through more and more, the failure of elite governance. And, I'm on the hook because I went to some of these schools and now I teach at them. And yet, I think, I side with those who intuit that, the emperors have no clothes, and we need, forms of commentary, whether in elite spaces or popular ones, that call them out and, suggest that merit, as we've defined it, is not a real distinction.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's very seductive, and it's very easy for people to think that they're just being smart by letting other people be the smartest guys in the room.
Right. I mean, it would be different if, they have the goods. And I just think it's very important in an age of attack on expertise in science to say, it can't be a totalistic skepticism, because there are things that you really do need training to know about, notably in natural science. I don't want either Biden or Trump in charge of nuclear policy.
Right.
They may have some input, but we need, people dealing with the COVID crisis who have been trained in public health. Right. That said, a lot of policy making has been about advancing the interests of the few in the name of the good of all, and it's proven disastrous in so many cases, and
right.
that's what's been bankrupted in our experience. So, like, we need less expertise, but also to preserve the right expertise in the right places.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm not like, obviously let's give this guy a shot.
Right.
John Doe. What do you think about COVID?
Right.
How would you like
exactly.
to devise a vaccine? Obviously, there are places for expertise and training, but it's more the idea that it's an ideology-free zone.
Yeah.
What
no,
happens
of course.
with
and that's what that really does link to the core of our discussion, because the central illusion or myth about the Supreme Court in particular and the law in general is that it's not politics, that there are some techniques that great jurists have of floating above ideology,
right,
and doing something else. And there's no amount of work that's too much to convince people that that's just not true. And I think that the Ruth Ginsburg's death gives us an opportunity either to like double down on Supreme Court worship, or to erode this cult that has been so central to Americans political beliefs for so long. That's what's at stake, as I see it.
And so how would we push in one direction over the other?
Well, it's going to be tough, because if indeed, McConnell and Trump together succeed in replacing her, I think it's almost, I can't imagine that Biden wouldn't be pushed to attempt to court pack. And that will consume a lot of airtime in the next, year or years. So I think it's really about like making principled arguments about strategies of getting the less power vested in this institution, rather than struggling over it. From my lifetime, in 1986, I was a teenager when Robert Bork they kicked off the era of like intense recrimination over Supreme Court nominees. So that's 30, 40 years now, in which these psychodramas of Supreme Court appointment have like sucked up the policy space and all other debates for at least a lot of a time in those decades. And if instead of getting sucked into them, we could take a step back and just ask to play a different game, namely a democratic game, I think we would be much better off in the long term.
Yeah. Wow, great. Any other questions from listeners or anything else that you want to talk about, Sam?
I'm good. It's been a privilege.
Yeah, no, executive privilege. Just kidding. You like that?
No, executive privilege is may have its place, but could be not too much of it.
Yeah. What else? I really do want to. We got to hit 1,000, guys. We're almost there. We're almost there. And also, I really wanted to play Waltzing Matilda because it's so pretty. So I've been asking people about the copyright version, or copyright free, and there's some controversy. In fact, maybe and I don't know how you are in intellectual property, Sam. Maybe you could dabble.
It's
never too late, Just I'll give you a couple
use
minutes.
It and hope I don't get in trouble.
Yeah, or I'll give you a couple minutes. You seem like a very smart guy. You can, become an expert in it, and then we'll play that song, and you can represent us in court. Just kidding. Rules-based order. What is this? I'm not sure. Someone asked that. Katie Halper, can you comment on rules-based order?
I think I know what that's a reference to. After Trump was elected, this idea arose that there had been that America after 1945 had created a rules-based international order that Trump was wrecking. Now, this was a lot like the general Trump washing, because the truth was there was never a rules-based international order, and it was never liberal. And the wars that America fought over all those years, which actually got more numerous after 1989 when the Cold War ended, are, I think, a testament to that. So it was like a nostalgia for an era that never was. The rule in the international order after 1945 was that that great powers could fight wars because they had vetoes on the UN Security Council, and the United States in the lead. And so once again, Trump, if we're angry at his belligerency or the power he has, we should, ask about how to rein it in, not just for him, but because, prior presidents have used it and future ones could too, including Joe Biden. I would like there to be a rules-based international order. I think it's, Mohandas Gandhi is said to have replied when asked what he thought about Western civilization, that it would be a good idea. Yeah. And that's my take on the rules-based international order. It would be nice if we ever had one.
Yeah. Great. Well, this was amazing. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
I will stay on and talk with people some more. And I'll, I'm pretty sure that, I like to think that I've inherited the intellectual history, institutional history that Sam has. So you can ask me anything about the law, and I'll definitely be able to channel my inner Sam. Should I go to law school, by the way? That's a good question.
I wouldn't. Okay. I warn people against it.
Yeah, it's
unless like my mom you really have a good reason.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I really like my criminal law class at undergrad at Wesleyan.
No, it is. It is. Yeah. The issues are interesting, and as of today, it remains. As Al Pacino says in one of his, less well-known movies, it's a backstage pass to, a lot of, the workings of power in this country. And so those are reasons to get into it, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah. Last thing I want to ask you about was, what was the... Oh, books to plug. They're asking about your books. So talk about your books.
Oh, well, I've written some. They're on Amazon. The one that came out most recently is called Not Enough: Human Rights in an Unequal World. And it's about the way in which human rights haven't been kind of posed a challenge or threat to neoliberalism, but have kind of coexisted with it. And then look for, in about a year, for this new book, which is, I think, going to be called something like Humane or Humane War, but the publishers haven't decided yet.
Okay, great. Yeah. And definitely follow Sam on Twitter.
Absolutely. I have so few followers.
Really? We're going to give you that Katie Halper Show bump.
All right, great.
We got to make it happen. Everyone follow Sam. I put
only if you're interested.
Only if you're interested. Yeah. Why is John Lewis trending on Twitter?
Yeah.
Is it going to be? I think people are probably linking
his ghost is
welcoming it. Yeah. And what about voting by mail?
Oh, well,
and
okay.
the stuff there.
This is a really tough area where I'm not very well informed, but um, unfortunately, Trump has made a lot of hay over claiming it's unreliable. I think the bigger issue is that it could, in some states, cause the result not to be known on election night. And some people, I'm not one of them, fear that Trump, the dictator, is kind of poised to seize power based on early returns rather than the ones that come in the mail. That's the kind of current doomsday scenario. Actually, there are so many doomsday scenarios, but that's the one that attaches to voting by mail. I plan to vote in person.
Wow.
It's a bold step.
Yeah, it's a bold step. It's very Republican, right?
It is.
Yeah, but that's kind of why, yeah. And what happens if a contested election goes to the Supreme Court and there isn't an justice to break the tie?
Well, that requires a lot, more stuff in the hypothetical. In general, the Supreme Court hears appeals from other courts, and if the Supreme Court breaks 4-4, it just means that the prior decision stands. So, in Bush v. Gore, that went up to the Supreme Court from the Florida Supreme Court, if I'm remembering correctly, or a lower federal court. And basically, if the Supreme Court is deadlocked, it means that whatever the last court to rule on it in the chain was, its opinion stands.
Do you watch Netflix, by the way, ever? Netflix shows?
Sure.
Have you watched The 12? It's about
I haven't
show. It's
heard
about
of
a
it.
jury.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
I'll look into
I enjoyed it.
Okay.
I would watch, I'd recommend it.
Okay, great. I've never been on it, never been summoned to a jury.
I was, but I recused myself in the voir dire.
Oh, great.
Yeah, they asked a question and I was too honest about how I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm sure I wouldn't get on, unfortunately, but some friends have.
Some of your best friends have been jury members?
Yeah.
Are you a socialist? Someone wants to know.
Yeah, that word has very little meaning, but in our world, it means stuff that I associate with. We'd have to say what it then means. If we ever got enough power to have to define it, it would be a great thing.
Yeah. Right. All right. That would be great. Okay. Thank you so much. And I'll be sure to make this into a podcast too, because it's been such a great discussion.
I've enjoyed it and I really appreciate the invite and see you next time, I hope.
Yeah, definitely come on again.
Okay. All right. Have a good night.
Hopefully under happier circumstances.
Right. Rest in peace.
And last thing, do you think there's where do you come down on the election? I'm going to have a debate show soon, but what are your thoughts on this? I know,
I'm unreliable. I thought, Hillary would win. I think Joe Biden will win. I think that the Democrats are sacrificing an immense opportunity. This is like, now Hillary lost the second most winnable election in U.S. history, and this is the most winnable.
Right.
And if it's anywhere close, it's on the Democrats, that they haven't figured out how to attract a massive majority against this miscreant, this charlatan. It's just an embarrassment. But, I believe that Biden will win. And I hope he will, but while fearing restoration of the status quo anti-Trump.
And how do you balance? I mean, do you think that Trump will be worse for the world and the country than Biden will be?
Yes. I think the best outcome would be for Biden to win, in my view, and then for us to make sure to both pressure him to the left and make sure that we not Trump wash and scapegoat Trump for our sins and instead own them and, make sure that Biden is not a kind of excuse for staring in the mirror.
Right. For both moral or preventative long-term reasons, but also just in terms of immediate reasons. Like you were saying, no one wants to be talked to like they're fascists.
Absolutely.
Trying to
I
convince people to
absolutely.
vote.
I
Yeah.
think that's well put.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again so much, Sam.
All right. Thanks. See you next
Bye, have a
time.
good night.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, guys. And yeah, I think we learned a lot, right? I'll see you guys Sunday night. I'm having on Eugene Puryear, at least Eugene Puryear, to talk about the recent crackdown on Party for Socialism and Liberation, PSL. I'm also going to have, so we'll be talking about that and other things like that. And then we will also be just talking about the news and stuff like that in general. So, all right. See you again that Sunday at 7 p.m. Bye, everyone. And thanks again so much to Sam. Bye.